Hello my loves, Tony here from TL Yarn Crafts and welcome back. Today we are tackling the biggest issue that plagues beginning Tunisian crocheters. It's the curl. Oh my god, the curl! If you've tried Tunisian crochet before, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're working away on a little bit of simple stitch, that return pass is healing something inside your soul. You happen to look down and your work looks like a taquito. Way to kill the vibe. Now let me be the first to tell you that curling in Tunisian crochet is completely normal, but that doesn't make it any less annoying. Now, if you're looking for the flowy, curl-free fabric of your dreams, make sure you keep watching. Today, we're gonna test 5 common cures for the curl to see what's best for your next project. Now, before we can solve a problem, we need to understand it. So why the heck does Tunisian crochet curl anyway? Well, there's 2 main things going on. First off, when you're making flat fabric, you're always focused on just the right side of your work. We're constantly pulling up loops towards us, and that causes vertical tension. So you're gonna see that curling along the bottom and the very top of your work. In addition to that, all of the fabric created during your return pass is laying on the back of your work, and all of those rows are stacking up on top of each other, and there's not a whole lot of room. As those rows continue to accumulate, they're going to push towards the front of the fabric to try and get a little bit more space between them, thus contributing even more to the curl. There's a lot of advice and theory out there on what can calm the Tunisian crochet curl, but what actually works? I've got 5 experiments and pepperoni. I was on a roll. Come here. There's a lot of advice and theory out there on how to calm the Tunisian crochet curl, but what actually works? I've set up 5 experiments to test them out. Option 1 starts before you even stitch, and that involves going up on your hook size before starting your project. Now with Tunisian crochet, it is already recommended that you go up 1 to 2 full millimeter sizes larger than what is recommended on the ball band to achieve a nice medium tension. But if that tension is still too tight, why not go up another ½ millimeter or even a full millimeter? To test this out, I made a bunch of swatches for you. Here we have swatches of Tunisian simple stitch made with a 5mm hook, a 6mm hook, an 8mm hook, and a 9mm hook. Now we can obviously see that there are differences here. The 5mm hook swatch is nice and curly. I mean, that's what I'm talking about, a taquito. She just rolled right up. 6mm is markedly better. We can actually see the stitches, but there's still some pretty severe curling at the top and the bottom. The 8mm is starting to feel a little bit more like what I would want my tension to look like, and the 9mm is on the borderline. As you can see, there's a lot more airiness between the stitches, and yes, we do have some nice relaxation and some drape, but that means that we did lose some of the integrity of the fabric, and it's just much too stretchy and drapey for unblocked fabric in my opinion. When it comes down to it, creating a softer gauge with a larger hook works up to a point. As we can see with our 9mm swatch, once you go over the edge, you're going to lose some of the integrity of your fabric. The hook size that works for you is really going to depend on your personal gauge as well as the project that you're making. If you don't mind something a little bit more drapey and open, sure, go with a larger hook. But if you need something with a tighter weave, you're going to need to go with a smaller hook and maybe try one of our other options. This time around, we're going to focus on counteracting that vertical tension that happens in our fabric by pulling up our loops a bit higher. I'm going to say right up front that this isn't so different than just using a larger hook, but I do know some makers that swear by this technique. To see if it actually works, I picked one of the curliest stitches that I know of, and that's the Tunisian knit stitch. Let's take a look. So looking here at this swatch of Tunisian knit stitch, you can see that it doesn't look like it's actually curling too much. Here's the technique I'm using. When I go in for my knit stitch, I yarn over, pull up the loop, but instead of stopping here, I'm giving it a flick at the end just to get some additional height on my loops. And I'm doing that for every stitch down the line, being really intentional about pulling up that loop and not worrying too much about them being the same height. I just want to make sure those loops are nice and tall. And the same thing for the edge stitch. Grabbing both loops of the last stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, and give it a flick. And now for my return pass, I'm keeping the gauge very loose, just yarning over and pulling through both of those loops until I have one loop left on the hook. And that's the technique that I've used so far for this entire swatch. Now if we take a look at it flat, sure, she's looking flat, but give her a flick. And look at that, she rolls right back up. That tension is definitely still present. Now, unless you're gonna have this fabric sitting flat on a surface with nobody ever touching it, you might wanna do a little bit more than just lifting up those loops to cure the curl. Another technique that is often encouraged is adding a border to Tunisian crochet. Now, theoretically, this should work because the weight of a border will help to redistribute some of that tension to the outer edges of the work. So let's see if it actually works. Here we have 2 identical swatches of Tunisian simple stitch, both of which were worked with an 8mm hook and DK weight yarn. You can see that this one on the left will curl with a quick little flick at the bottom as well as the top. But this one here is laying pretty flat, and that is because I've added 2 rounds of single crochet along the border. But when it comes down to the curling, this is looking like a really good solution. And I love the idea of adding a border to Tunisian crochet anyway. Even with traditional crochet, it puts a nice amount of finish and polish on your work, and it's going to help even out any tension issues that you happen to have. When it comes down to it, this is a perfectly good solution to deal with the curl, but in my opinion, it is not where we should stop. So let's keep the experiments rolling. Here comes a technique that I am always jazzed about, and that is working with stitches that just don't curl as much. There are over 400 documented stitches within Tunisian crochet, and there are bound to be at least a few that aren't plagued by the curl. I've worked up a few swatches that theoretically shouldn't be curling. Let's take a closer look and see if they worked. The first swatch I worked up is one I know does not curl, and that is the Tunisian honeycomb stitch. To create this stitch, we alternate simple and pearl stitches to get this lovely honeycomb texture. What's happening here is the simple stitch is pulling towards the front of the work, the pearl stitch is pulling to the back of the work, so that tension cancels each other out to give us nice flat fabric. Of all the beginner stitches that I know, this is one that does not curl at all, so I definitely recommend that everybody learn it. For the sake of this video, I wanted to try a stitch that was new to me, and that's what brought me across the basket weave stitch. This one alternates knit stitches and reverse stitches for a lovely basket weave texture. If we take a look at this here, we've got our knit stitches happening in these smoother spaces, and all of our bumps are our reverse stitch. Now, by having both of those stitches present and pulling on the fabric in opposite directions, theoretically this shouldn't curl, and by all accounts it doesn't curl a lot. It definitely still curls a little bit here at the top as well as the bottom, but it does end up going back more flat than a lot of our other stitches, so I would call this a success. Another group of stitches that shouldn't curl a lot are open or lacy stitches. In this case, we can use negative space to deal with some of that extra tension inside our fabric. The first swatch I worked up to test this is our mesh stitch. So this alternates simple stitch with yarn overs to create this nice open and lacy texture. I'm not seeing much by way of curling, which is nice. There is still a little bit here on the bind off edge as well as the foundation, but the fabric itself is laying nice and flat, and it has really beautiful drape. And while we're not dealing with a lot of curling here, you can definitely see that this is just a bit of a wonky swatch. We'd need to do some more steps to make this look as pristine as it possibly could. And while going through my Rolodex of open stitches, I thought of another that I absolutely love, and that's the arrowhead stitch. The arrowhead stitch is a little bit more involved, but it alternates open rows with closed rows. So think about mesh, but adding in a row of simple stitch in between. So we get this really lovely open work pattern, and we also don't get quite so much curling. We'll get a little bit more curling than the original mesh stitch, but it does look lovely and flat. This is a really good chance for you to experiment with different types of stitches. Take the concepts that we practice here and apply them to some of your own stitch patterns. So we've got the honeycomb stitch that alternates simple and pearl stitches, but what else could you alternate with pearl stitches? Maybe knit stitches, twisted knit stitches, twisted simple stitches. The world is your oyster. Have some fun, experiment, and play around. So we've made it to option 5, the option you always knew was coming, because all roads lead to blocking. Blocking involves adding water and some level of heat to your project to cure a multitude of ailments. Stiff fabric, block it. Wonky edges, block it. Uneven stitches, block it. But what can blocking do for Tunisian crochet? Let's find out. For this experiment, I'm going to use that lovely swatch of basket weave that I made. I think it looks so very pretty, but I've got a feeling that we can open up these stitches, even out that weave texture, and also clean up these edges here with just a little bit of blocking. Now, I personally like to go with steam blocking, especially for acrylic-based projects, but we're going to need some supplies. The first thing we're going to need is a garment steamer. Now, I've had this garment steamer for about 5 years. I will link it down in the description so you can get one too. Let's start by turning on our garment steamer, and when this light is solid here, that means we're ready to go. In the meantime, let's get our piece down on a blocking board. This is a blocking board right here. It looks like one of those puzzle mats that you see at daycare centers, and you could absolutely use those as well. Next, we need to pin everything in place, and that's where knit blockers and T-pins come into play. T-pins are individual pins that you can place in your fabric to hold it to the blocking board. Now, knit blockers are like placing 4 or even 8 8 T-pins all at once. It just makes the process a little bit faster. One of my secrets that I love to share about blocking Tunisian crochet is turning it face down. And what that'll do is help soften the curl even more. So first things first, I'm going to turn my swatch upside down, and then I'll find a set of intersections here on my blocking boards. I'm going to start with my knit blockers and begin pinning that in place. By the time you pin everything down, your steamer is likely ready to go. So let's get blocking. This steamer that I have has a little trigger on it, and when you press the trigger and push it down, it gives you continuous steam, which is great because we want to thoroughly dampen our swatch just to make sure that steam has made it down all the layers. So I'm simply going to turn my steamer on. I've hit the trigger for continuous steam. Oh, that's hot. And now I can go over all of the bits of my swatch here. So I'm going to focus a lot on the edges because that's where a lot of the curling and the tension is happening. Can you see that steam? That is wild. Okay. And I'm going to take my time here because it's really important to me that my swatch lays flat. I think it's important that we go through all of the finishing steps to make sure things look beautiful. That's how we honor the process that we put into it. You put a lot of work into this, so don't stop right at the finish line. Now that I'm done steaming my piece and I can feel by touch that it is nice and damp, I'm going to leave it here to dry completely. The worst thing you can do is unpin something before it's done drying because it will likely curl right back up.
A few moments later.
I'm using acrylic yarn that dries almost instantly, and my swatch is indeed completely dry. So let's take the pins out and see how this experiment went. Now you know you're onto something when you start taking the pins out and things don't curl up on you, but we won't know for sure until we flip this fabric over. So let's get this blocking board out of the way. I'm feeling optimistic. All right, let's give it a flip. Oh, wow. Look at that. Edges are nice and straight and even. Give it a little flick on the bottom and it falls right back down. Same thing on the top. And you know what? The sides too, because why not? Everybody gets some love. The drape is also out of this world amazing. I mean, did you know acrylic yarn could do that? That is the power of blocking, babes. Sure, you don't have to block your pieces, but if we're talking about eliminating the curl, this is the best result we've gotten from any of our experiments today. When it comes to blocking, I err towards steam blocking. I find it's the easiest way for me to control the process and also making sure the blocking doesn't go too far and permanently distort my stitches. And I found that steam blocking works well for plant, animal, and acrylic fibers. I typically will reserve wet blocking just for shawls made with animal fibers. So think merino wool, alpaca, that kind of stuff. My goal there is to get as much size and drape out of the piece as possible, and wet blocking helps me do that. Now, I'll never wet block anything else because I'm still a little bit traumatized from the time that I wet blocked a merino wool sweater and that thing was down to my knees. I just won't risk it anymore. It's not worth it. Now, the follow-up question is always, do I have to re-block my piece after I've blocked it initially after making it? And the answer is like yes and no. For plant and animal fibers, hand washing your piece and laying it flat to dry is about as much as you need to do. Now, acrylic fibers are usually machine washable, so even if you steam block it the first time, once you toss it in that washer and maybe even the dryer, that curl is never coming back. We just reviewed 5 common recommendations for curing the common curl, but which one of them is better for you? Well, only you can answer that. Since every maker's tension and crochet style is different, sizing up the hook may work for some, while lifting the loops work better for others. My recommendation is to try out all of these and whatever other recommendations you can find to see what's the best fit for you. So let me know, babies, what is it that you like to use to beat the curl? Do you like to use some of the recommendations I offered, or is there something else that you can share with your fellow makers? Drop down in the comments and let us know. And if you have recommendations for future videos from TL Yarn Crafts, you know I want to hear it. Put that in the comments too. Hey you like my scarf? I bet you do. Since we're talking Tunisian crochet, I thought I'd introduce you to the Bahama wrap. This is my latest design and I am completely obsessed. It uses the Tunisian chevron stitch paired with a layered color changing technique. And by using some highly variegated yarns, I'm able to create a fade that looks almost seamless. If you're interested in trying out this pattern, you can find the free version up on my blog, a PDF in my shop. You can find kits from Lion Brand, and if you're a honeybee inside inside my membership, the Yarn Hive community, you can get this pattern for free for a limited time only. I've got links to all of those places down in the description. Now, as of filming this video, I am currently at 739,000 subscribers here on the channel, which still blows my mind. But you know what is even wilder than that? Your girl is trying to get to 1 million. I know, lofty goal, but I don't know no other goals. Now, I know we can do it, but I'm going to need your help. So if I taught you how to crochet, if you've ever laughed at any of my corny jokes, if you've tried a product that I've recommended, or if you just think my dog is cute, please consider subscribing to my channel. It really helps out my channel, and it'll give me a chance to plan something epic for the 1 million sub celebration. All right, lovelies, that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.